And welcome to the Podcast Editors Mastermind, where we talk about the business side of podcasting. And if you're joining us on the live stream, be sure to leave your comments and questions in the chat, and we'll gladly talk about it on this show. This podcast grew out of our own mastermind, where we help each other with our podcast editing businesses and decided to help everybody else, at least as much as we can. Our conversation today, I'm really interested in providing unique services to your clients. And a couple of things I've been looking to kind of expand my own business into. But before we get into that, let's tell you who we are. I'm Daniel Abendroth of Roth Media. Right below me, we got...
I'm Carrie Caulfield-Eric of Yeah Podcasting.
And I'm Brian Ensminger of TopTierAudio.com. And above me, we have...
Jon Gay of JAG in Detroit podcast. Nice to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. So Jon is one of the many stories of somebody who spent a very long time in radio, saw the change in the weather, and made the pivot into podcasting, spending 15 years in radio in Vermont, Detroit, and New Orleans. And as an on-air personality, learned how to create compelling content and has taken those same skills over into podcasting, where he made that pivot back in 2018. So Jon, tell us a little bit about kind of what you did in radio, and then like why and how you kind of made that pivot into podcasting.
I always kind of loved the radio and the craft of audio and connecting with people and that personality aspect. You know, I always tell potential podcast clients about the favorite morning show you grew up with. You feel like you grew up with them, you know them because they were with you in the car on the way to school, on the way to work, whatever it was. And as I went through radio in 15 years, as you mentioned, Daniel, Vermont, here to Detroit, down in New Orleans, back to Detroit, I realized that the industry was changing very quickly. A lot of it had to do with large companies buying up radio stations, which we can make an analogy to podcasting later on if we need to. But when these large companies bought up radio, it became more of a business, more of a cost-cutting measure, and it became more about the bottom line than actually creating the compelling content. And I think I was laid off 3 times for budget cuts, not for cause, but for budget cuts, because somebody at a corporate office in New York or Philly said, hey, we don't need that guy in Vermont or Detroit or whatever it was. He's a line item on a spreadsheet. So I started networking and talking to people, learning a little bit more about podcasting. If you guys know Seth Ressler from Jacobs Media, I connected to Seth through some mutual contacts when I was, as they say in radio, on the beach and not working and trying to figure out what I was going to do next. Helped him for a couple of years with his Detroit show, The Debrief, which was about the arts and entertainment scene in and around Detroit, which was growing very quickly pre-pandemic. We worked together, kind of fell in love with the craft of podcasting. And Seth was the one who told me in 2018, dude, you got to go to Podcast Movement. And I'm like, dude, I'm not working. Like, can't swing this trip with the airfare and the hotel and everything. He's like, trust me, it'll be worth it down the road. Put on a credit card if you have to. Go. So I went to Philadelphia 2 years, whatever year that was, 18. And I met Carrie, I met Jennifer, I met some other folks, and was blown away at how cooperative and encouraging the podcasting space was. It reminded me of what radio was when I first got into it, before it became a little bit more competitive and a little bit more business centric. It was about the craft. It was about helping people out and helping each other. And from there, I started, I always tell the story that in the fall of 2018, my wife and I were in Hawaii for her 40th birthday. And I was between jobs. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. I was applying to all these marketing and agency jobs. I was dabbling in podcasting. And my wife very famously said to me, listen, you're kind of half-assing 2 different things at once. I need you to pick one and whole ass it. And I said, okay. So podcasting, I was developing a huge passion for, and I've been growing my business for 2.5 years since.
I love your wife.
So do I.
That's good.
Yeah.
And my wife works in corporate finance, and I was always terrified to be a small business owner and all the things and stresses that come with it. She said, I will help you with this. You do the work. You're the audio expert. You're the one who knows this stuff. I will help you with the accounting and the bookkeeping and systems and templates. And, she spends her entire day in Microsoft Excel anyway. So she helps me run the business side of it in addition to her full-time job, which is easy because now we're both been locked up in the house since March. But, hey, honey, can you? So she's been, I really, truly could not have done it without her. So all props to Ellen, my wife, who I'll probably have listened to this at some point.
I love that. Yeah, because, my wife and she's my business partner in Roth Media. And like while I work like at the technical audio side of things, she does a lot of like content strategy and coaching the clients and kind of like the more creative side of things, whereas like I'm in like the technical. So like, I love having that kind of husband-wife duo. That's fantastic.
And if I need, being a solopreneur, as you know, it's like, okay, I've got this issue with a client or I've got something else going on. Hey, let me get a second set of eyes on this or second set of ears on this. Hey, here's the situation. Here's how I'm thinking of handling it. What do you think? Just as a check on you, which is a great thing to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. There's not a lot of times, like whenever I'm replying to email, like I'm very brief and just like answer the question. Like my email is typically like 2 sentences. So I'm like, honey, can you take a look at this? And then it's like, oh, okay. And like it turns into like a paragraph that's like much more explanatory, like it gets a point across, but in a much more friendly way than my like, your audio's bad. How come?
It's that people person element.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if your wife ever wants to make spreadsheets for podcast editing businesses, yeah.
Honey, you looking for a side hustle?
Right?
I mean, there's something to that, right? Because you talked about how radio is becoming more corporate, more about the bottom line. And the reality is that's because somebody had a spreadsheet that said, this is how we maximize our profits. But we're business owners. So we also have to figure out what's that sweet spot of maintaining the joy and maximizing the bottom line.
Absolutely.
And a lot of that's in what metrics you look at and how you manage the business. And if your wife has spreadsheets that can help us do that, I bet you there's going to be some editors that are willing to buy that.
I would buy it. I'm always asking, like, can I see your spreadsheet?
She is, yeah.
I really am.
I'll show you yours. No, sorry, I'll show you mine. So that, I mean, I'm gonna bring this up to her. We might have just hit on our next $1 million idea right here in this podcast.
It could be.
Yeah, this is the bonus to have a conversation with me, because I will give you business ideas because I want somebody to fix all my stuff.
Yeah. Like they say, like starting a business, you have to figure out what people's problems are and then solve them. And Carrie is great at finding the problems.
Yeah.
And let you know like what you need to do to solve it for her.
You hit on something though that's really important to mention to podcast editors as you're pitching clients though, Daniel, which is you're finding a problem, you're solving a problem for somebody. That problem might be, how do I stick out and market myself? Because I specialize a lot in branded podcasts for small businesses. Taking out an ad in the weekly local paper is going to probably cost more in most cases than editing a podcast, and people are going to throw it away anyway. Or how do I stand out, on Twitter or Instagram with all the masses and Facebook? Well, a podcast can certainly do that. And that's something that I tell clients all the time.
Oh, yeah. And that actually works for our own businesses as well. And we're going to be starting our marketing challenge that is going to focus on that specifically. So I'm kind of glad you brought that up, because then I don't have to plug it. But yeah, absolutely. That's that value proposition, right?
I have a couple of friends that are starting to dabble in doing what we all do, that are either in radio or used to be in radio, side hustle, or doing this, full time. And I've started to train them on what I learned and how to translate those radio skills into podcasting. So what you say is certainly well taken, Carrie.
So what are I'm always curious about the kind of intersection between radio and podcasting. What is, I guess, the view? I feel like there's a kind of a demarcation where it's like podcasting is a redheaded stepchild of radio. Is that what radio people think? Because I don't really know any radio people. Or
that's a fair question, and I'm going to throw a disclaimer in front of my answer, which is that I got out of radio in August of 2017. So I have not worked in radio full time in now over 3 years. They laid me off for a budget cut 2 weeks after my wedding when my boss convinced them they shouldn't lay me off the week of my wedding, and that's everything you need to know about how corporate radio works. So in 2017, podcasting looked a heck of a lot different than it looks in 2021. So I think podcasting was just kind of to radio people, it was just kind of like, oh, that's cute, that little thing over there. Like, hey, maybe we'll like tape our best bit from the morning show and throw the phone scam up on Apple Podcasts or whatever. So that's how it was then. But I think now there is such an appreciation for the growth of podcasting. You've all seen the stat about how it's going to be a $1 billion industry in 2021 and would have been in 2020 had it not been for the pandemic. You see iHeart, Entercom, Beasley, all these huge American radio companies really spending a lot of money in podcasting. In fact, and I mentioned this in my podcast where I talk about the industry, iHeart, who is the largest owner of radio stations in the country, formerly Clear Channel, at their height, they owned 1,100 radio stations. At the same time, in fourth quarter, when they were laying off radio employees for months, the layoffs just kept coming, and they were buying podcasting companies. They were investing in podcasting while they were laying off DJs and sales managers and general managers. And to me, as sort of the leader in the space, notwithstanding their history and their $22 billion bankruptcy, they really had an emphasis more on digital and podcasting than traditional radio. Yes, of course, traditional radio makes a ton more money than podcasting right now, but that is changing very, very quickly. I actually have had radio people say, because, hey, you speak my language, I work in radio, what can you tell me about podcasting? I think radio is more than just podcast curious at this point. I think they're very, very into what podcasting is going to do and become.
Do they need podcast editors? Or do you have that market locked up?
Well, it's funny because, everybody kind of sees it the same way, but there's different skills involved. If you have to cut something to make a 30 or 60 second radio spot, you might be doing the Micro Machines guy, date myself with that reference, but it's, hey, come on down to the used car lot. We got these Fords for sale and these Toyotas here. We got it. And you're putting the sentences on top of each other to fit it into a 30-second spot. That would sound terrible in a podcast. The idea of letting it breathe, and we could debate all night about whether or not to leave breaths in podcasts. I'm sure you guys have had plenty of conversations about that. What works, in the blueprint of radio, there's definitely an art to it in podcasting, and how that is different. There's definitely a different skill set involved that I had to learn.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's
cool.
And because I'm always also. The thing is, I don't know. You think these people are getting laid off from radio with these skills. I don't necessarily want them to come in and take all the jobs, even though there's plenty of jobs. But I feel like there's some people that actually do feel that way, and I don't really feel that way. But that's why I ask specifically.
Well, and I think for a lot of radio folks that are born and bred, and it's a drug, I can tell you that, being on stage in front of 7,000 people to announce an act at a concert at the old Joe Louis Arena in Detroit is an adrenaline rush that I can't even put into words. And I love that stuff. Or having somebody say, oh, I heard you say that on the radio and you made me laugh and I was having a bad day, whatever it is. There's a certain drug to being in radio, or I guess probably being on TV too. I was never good looking enough to be on TV. That's why I did radio. But when people have that taken away from them, it's like, well, now what? And they almost kind of, especially like a high profile DJ or like a morning show DJ, loses that identity, and it becomes, well, now what do I do? And yes, some are going to go to podcasting because there's a lot of crossover between the skills, but a lot of folks are just kind of like, well, now what? Do I open a used car lot? Like, I spent every Saturday trying to get people to come on down and get, 0% financing, but people really have to figure out what it is they want to do. And to your point, Carrie, some will come into podcasting, some won't. Some will go to other things too.
I think, as I think about like that morning DJ, I think there's another part of it, right? Because it's not just what do I do, but also who am I?
Yes.
I've been this person this on-air personality for this many years, who's the real me?
I'll give you the perfect example on that, Brian. So as you can see, my name is Jon Gay. I had a very difficult time in middle school in the 90s because I was the short, scrawny, balding Jewish kid with the funny last name. And I had to make the joke first so they'd laugh with me and not at me. But then when I got to college at Syracuse and I started being on the campus radio station in 1998, I knew Jon Gay wasn't a name that I was going to use on the radio. But I'm trying to come up with a name. Well, Johnny G, John Gray. Well, my initials are JAG. Well, there's a TV show called JAG. I could probably do that. And as I kind of went through my 20s in my career, long before I was married, but there is kind of this, JAG mentality that I kind of got into, which is kind of like JAG is the guy who will take the microphone in the club and walk around. A coworker once said that microphone is like Superman's cape when you walk around the club as a radio DJ. But if you take that mic out of my hand, John is a wallflower. He's not going to talk to anybody. But JAG, oh, hey, how you doing, bachelorette party? What's going on? But I think once the radio part of it was done and I moved on to being a small business owner and doing this, and I have some clients call me John and some clients call me JAG, friends and that call me John, friends that call me JAG. I kind of had to figure out where those two intersected to figure out who I really was. So that's a really good point that you mentioned, Brian.
Thanks. Yeah, and Mike, in the comments, just referenced that radio laced with personal niche interest is podcasting. I think that's pretty accurate.
There is something to that, Micah. And I think that what radio, I don't want to be a naysayer of radio all day, but the radio that I fell in love with that personality where you really connected with people, whereas outside morning shows and spoken word formats like news, talk, and sports, that connection is gone because for hours long that I could explain when they changed the rating systems, they told the music DJs, shut up and play the music. And so that left us less opportunity to connect with our audience. So I would say that podcasting, yes, is personal niche interest mixed with personality radio and those that are still lucky to have it.
Awesome. Really good conversation there. Okay. I don't think to end it.
Don't wind me up. I'll go too far. So,
so let's talk more. Let's get back into podcasting and talk about what you do. So before we get into like your super unique, was it your diamond package or your platinum package? Your gold package that's listed on your website. Something that I've been wanting to get into. So I'm curious about how you facilitate it, what your process is, and all that. But so what I'm talking about is you do live monitoring of your client show and provide feedback. So tell us a little bit about what your process is and how you set that up.
Well, the way I started off with the packages that I'm about to change, I'll hit on that in a minute. But I tried to have a nod to my old radio DJs with records. So I had silver, gold, platinum, and diamond. So if a record goes gold, it's sold 500,000. If it goes platinum, it's 1 million. If it goes diamond, it's 10 million. So that's where that came from. And the basic package is what a lot of people, I'm sure, listening and watching do. You send me the MP3, I edit it, I send it back to you, bing, bang, boom, and it's done. And this is sort of as COVID was starting to come in and I was figuring out these packages. So right now I'm recording everybody remotely from here in my studio. I think I've been in 2 offices since March. But previous to the pandemic, I would take my Rodecaster with my Shure SM58 $50 microphones, and I would go on site with a client and record them in their office with their guests and whoever was on the show. That, of course, is on hold now with the pandemic. But the difference between the gold and the platinum package, with the caveat that everything's being done remotely, is I'll monitor it and I'll try to rein you in if you're starting to go too far on a tangent and too far off topic. But the next level up, I'll be the co-host and I'll moderate it and I'll kind of steer the conversation. I think going back to my radio days, the thing that I loved the most in radio, for a couple of years in New Orleans, I was a program director and I would do what we call an air check, where I would sit down with the DJ, I would listen back to a tape of a show with them and critique them and say, hey, this was really good. What did you try doing this next time? Hey, this could probably be a little better. Have you thought about hitting this topic from that angle or phrasing something this way. And this one woman, Angie, that I was working with in New Orleans, everything I told her to do, the next week she would do it flawlessly. And it was such a cool feeling to say, hey, I gave you some direction to make your content better. And she'd be like, oh my God, I hear it. Oh, that's so much better. And so having that background in coaching people as far as content goes and sort of trimming the fat and getting rid of all the kind of tangents and, irrelevant stuff where people's time is very valuable and you want to respect your audience. That comes from me from radio. And granted, in radio, it was a lot more strict. If you're a morning show and you've got a 2 or 3 minute break, or if you're a music DJ and you got to shut up after 20 seconds before Katy Perry starts singing, that's a little bit different. But the same kind of thing applies where, hey, you know what? I'm looking at our outline here. We kind of already covered that topic. Let's go here now. Let's leave that one to the side. Or hey, let's hit point number 5 before we do number 4. I got a better way to transition into doing this. With most of my clients, what I do is I have them send me just a show outline of bullet points before we record. And I work with a lot of financial advisors. So it's a 30-minute podcast and say, okay, today we're going to talk about Roth IRAs or whatever the topic is. Okay, give me the 5 bullet points that I'm going to ask you as a layperson about Roth IRAs that then you can explain it to somebody listening who doesn't have a Series XYZ degree and is not a certified financial planner that knows all the acronyms and the terminology. So that's, I think, something that I offer that's pretty unique to my clients is having that background of being able to coach in real time. And again, we all do the tech stuff with the microphones, and that is extremely important. But also once the podcast is going to say, okay, I know that this particular client tends to go on more tangents. I've got to have a little bit of a shorter leash with him and rein him in, or she's really on point and I've got to, we're going to hit our bullet points and we're going to go. She's going to get off script. I know that with this particular client, if I jump in to ask a question as he's explaining something, he's going to stutter a little bit more. So I've got to make sure to hang back and not even give too many yas and ahas as he's speaking, or it's going to trip him up. And that's one more edit I've got to make. So really getting a feel for each client and how to best coach them to get the best out of them possible. Did that answer your question?
And then some.
Yeah. Yeah, it actually answered some follow-up questions. I mean, we could just go home now.
Thanks, guys.
Feel free to shut me up at any time because I can talk. So
no, I think it's great because I was going to ask, how do you handle like interrupting your clients as they're recording their show? Because I would be worried that they would do that they would stutter or they would completely lose their kind of energy. Do they react to do you have any times where they don't react well to your critique?
I'm thinking of one particular client who I love and I have a great relationship with her. She was teasing me, but she said something to the effect of, I can't remember how she phrased it, but it was something like, Jag, I know you like to jump in and guess what I'm going to say next, or offer an opinion, or say, hey, don't you mean this? But it's not always true. And so I was like, ooh, I'm stung a little bit, but okay. So knowing where that line is with each client, that takes a little. I don't interrupt them a lot, but for example, if I've got a client who they're already into a tangent that I know I'm already going to cut everything that they're saying from a couple seconds before and anything they would say after that. Say, hey, John Q, whatever your name is, like, okay, let's, why don't we try this? Let me do this. Hey, you know what? I got a better way to transition that. Let me set you up for that by saying this. Because for a lot of these folks, and again, a lot of what I do is branded podcasts, you want them to sound as authoritative in their field as possible. So there are many podcasts that are along the lines of, hey, wherever the conversation goes, that's great. But I think for a branded podcast, I take out the vast majority of ums and uhs and breaths because I want somebody to sound like the absolute authority in their field because they're using it as a branding tool for their business.
Do you find then that because you're there, you're able to help them structure a better experience for their listener? Like, is that what happens?
Yeah, I think so, because it's the whole tangent thing, to keep coming back to that. And the first thing I always tell clients is my biggest pet peeve, aside from bad audio, is is somebody who starts off with a podcast with, hey, here's how to follow me on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and you don't know me, but here's what I had for breakfast today. And people's time is limited, and I got to mention Joel Saul-Sehy, who's out here in Metro Detroit as well. He did a presentation at Podcast Movement in Orlando in 2019, where he talked about the first 2 minutes of the podcast. It's like a James Bond movie. You've got to get somebody's attention with that car chase or that helicopter crash or whatever it is right away. And in this case, if I'm just checking out your podcast for the first time and I don't know anything about you or what you're doing, you've got to give me something of value off the bat when you start so that I can know this is something I want to listen to. And it's a little bit like a business transaction. If you're going to ask me for a social media follow or to sign up for my email or to call me for a business or whatever it ends up being, if I've given you 15 or 30 minutes of compelling content, I then have the latitude to ask you for something in return. I've established myself as an authority in that field, and I've been able to how do I put this? You've given me something of value that, oh, you know what? I think I would like to follow you more. I'd like to know more about what you have to say. I like what you had to offer here. But doing the plugs in the beginning, and again, a quick plug like we did here, notwithstanding, that's fine. But to go on and on a tangent of, here's every possible way you can interact with me in the history of the internet. And by the way, here's what I had for breakfast today. I think you lose people.
One of my biggest podcasting pet peeves is with two hosts, like that pointless banter that has nothing to do with the show. It's like, just get on with it. I can't remember who it was, but I was listening to somebody critique a podcast. But it was the first 6 minutes was essentially going through, it was 4 or 5 people on the show, and they each took 2 minutes to introduce themselves before they actually got into it.
Goodbye, I'm gone.
Yeah. And I don't need to know your weather last week at all.
Especially if I'm listening 2 or 3 months from now.
Right.
Exactly. Right.
So you mentioned helping them develop the sort of the flow of their show. You don't want 7 minutes of ads before you get started, Joe Rogan. So do you have any resources available for a podcast editor that wants to help clients develop a show clock?
I don't have a specific show clock, and that is a great question. I think for the most part, what I like to have my clients do is I stick to bullet points. If you had a show that had a bunch of regular features where you had, okay, we're going to do the, stick the hand in the cookie jar, ask the question, or whatever it ends up being with the guest, you might want to think about a sort of a clock at that point. But also the old radio show clock is based on a circle of a clock of an hour. And okay, we're going to this many minutes on this, and this many minutes on this, and this many minutes on this. You don't have those restrictions in a podcast. If you have a really compelling thing and you say, okay, well, we're going 63 minutes today, or we're kind of out of content, we're only going 56, that's okay. So not a specific clock or wheel, but I do like to have it lined up in bullet points of the different areas we're going to hit on as we go through. And most of my podcasts are interview style anyway.
Nice.
Do you find that a lot of clients, there's a lot of people looking for that co-host role?
Yes and no. I think it really depends on the personality and the motivation behind a podcast. And I think as you look for clients, you're going to find so many different things across the board on that, where you might have somebody who says, oh, I'm doing a podcast because it's the hot new thing, and my boss says I need to do a podcast and I'm funny, but their heart really isn't in it. But you might have somebody who has just a really, really dynamic personality and they're ready to rock and roll out of the gate. You might have somebody who has a lot to say, but needs a little bit of the material coaxed out of them. So I really think that it's everyone is different and every situation is unique. And I have that conversation when I onboard a client. I say, hey, I've got 15 years of radio experience. I'm happy to host it. I'm happy to sort of drive the car and interview you. If you feel like you want to be the host and you want to be the one in control, I don't have a fragile ego. I won't be offended if you say you're not interested in having me host. That's completely fine. Whatever you're most comfortable with. Or we can try it this way. And then if this doesn't quite work out, we can pivot. We can change. I think, everybody who's done more than 10 podcasts goes back, listen to their first podcast, goes, ugh, wish I'd done that a little bit differently. So it's okay. You don't have to have the absolute master plan done when you launch episode 1, but you can certainly be willing to change.
So I'm curious as to what the lead time is. So you're doing basically the show with your client.
Mhm.
How much preparation, how much time between getting developing the topic idea, the bullet points, how much time is between that and the recording?
So it's funny because I think about the financial advisors that I work with, and of the dozen or so that I work with, I have some that prep the show with meticulous bullet points, and doesn't involve me in the process. At this point, they're just putting a detailed list together. And I say, send it to me by close of business the day before we record. That's all I need. Send it to me by close of business day record. I'll look at it. I'll follow along on the bullet points. I have some that script out their whole show because some people are better off a script than off bullet points. Some people sound like they're reading when it's off a script. Again, it's everybody individual thing. And then I have some clients, God bless them, or bless their hearts, as I learned to say when I lived in the South for a couple of years, who don't prep it. And I'll jump on with them. They've paid for the time. They've paid for the podcast. All right, Joe. So what are we talking about today? I'm clicking around on the website. Yeah, why don't we talk about this? Okay. That show's not going to be very good. I'm still at the risk of being callous about it, I'm still getting paid. But I will nudge them a couple times, say, hey, when I onboard them, send me some bullet points beforehand, and, so we can have a good way to lay it out. I have one of my clients is also a former radio guy. He can just ad lib for half an hour, and I just kind of wind him up and let him go. Like you guys are doing with me a little bit here. But I think, the best analogy I always give my clients is the race car analogy. One of my first bosses in radio said, and I'm not a NASCAR fan, but he said, and neither was he, but doing a radio show, or in this case, a podcast, is like driving a race car. You do all your work in the pit. So when the race starts, all you've got to do is drive the car. So the more prep, the more you can line up your show, the more you can put into it ahead of time, the smoother it's going to be, the better the content is going to be, the better the listening experience is going to be, the less you're going to stutter your way through it because you have a good feel for where you're going to go and the order you're going to do it. It makes such a difference, but I can't force every client to do it.
Yeah, that's why I asked about the how much lead time, because part of it makes me nervous asking for the client to actually send me something before they record because it's hard enough to get them to actually, when you're thinking about having them send the files, right? It is hard sometimes to get clients to be on time and not at the last minute. So, yeah.
Yeah. I'm actually thinking, we'll come back to the packages that we mentioned a minute ago. I'm actually, thinking of changing up my packaging right now because, I said the premium package is in person, but that's still not going to happen for a few more months, at least, hopefully in a few months. But something that I've started doing with clients, and I'm just getting into this a little bit, and I would certainly love any advice the three of you have for me on this, is I'm starting to dabble in video editing. Video recording, not yet video editing. I've had clients ask me about video. I've had a couple clients that have said, I only want to do this and record with you if we're doing video. Well, I'm an audio guy. I'm a radio guy. Audio is my passion. You paint the picture. You get away from the Brady Bunch squares on Zoom and put the headphones in your ears and walk the dog, and you can get a break from computers and put it on the car. And I always tell clients, you can't watch a YouTube video while you're driving, or at least you really shouldn't. So podcasting goes in places that video can't. But because I've had people ask about video, I thought, there might be a revenue opportunity here, even though it's not my forte. So I'm starting to offer clients just a raw video, not an edited video, because video is a bear to edit unless you're really, really good at it. There was a video recently in the Podcast Editors Club that was phenomenal on doing it, but it's not my forte. I'll tell my clients, look, I will still give you the edited podcast. I'll take out the false starts and the ums and uhs and likes and you-knows and disfluencies. But with the video, it's one take. If you want something for YouTube or Facebook videos or whatever it is, we'll video the podcast, but I'm not going to have like a 15-year-old in his bedroom, a bunch of jump cuts in between the video every time you say, oh, can I start that sentence again? And it's and all that kind of jumpy stuff that'll make you dizzy watching it. I think I would like to maybe down the road learn more about video editing and get more proficient at it. But because people are asking about video editing, if I can do the existing podcast at the existing package and then for an extra $150, record the video and send them the video of the podcast, and they can, if they want to put a logo on it, if they want to edit it all, if they want to put it on YouTube, so be it. I'm offering that as sort of an add-on at this point until I get really, really comfortable with video, but the emphasis is certainly on the audio.
Yeah, so video is not something that I do offer. It's something that I've considered. Part of the reason I've shied away from it is because, well, one, I don't sit on the recordings with my clients.
Okay.
And two, I tend to get, occasionally I get clients that have subscribed to the, who's the guy that yells and cusses all the time? Brain shut off.
Could you narrow that down a little bit?
Yeah.
Anyway, basically, I'm concerned that I would get a lot of clients that want to sit down with a Zoom video and record, 15 minutes walking around the room 5 feet away from the computer, like they're doing a presentation, and then try to turn that into a podcast and a video and all the assets that go with that. And frankly, I don't want to deal with those people. So I've got to do some work up here, and then I've got to figure out who are the clients that are a good fit for that multi-channel approach where you've got a video, you've got the audio, you've got the social stuff, and then what package would make sense for me to put together for them, just like what you're trying to do right now as well.
It's interesting you talk about the marketing piece too, Brian, because that's not something I offer for my clients. I tell them, I said, I'm the audio guy. I am going to provide you, Simplecast is the host that I use. I'm going to provide you the link, the embed code, the recast, or the audiogram. And then it's on you and your marketing people, whether it's you're a solopreneur, you have a marketing department, it is up to you how you want to position this, how you want to market it, anything. I don't even do episode artwork because when it comes to graphics, I'm just terrible. It's not my forte at all.
Same here.
So I'll say, I'll provide you all the audio stuff. You're going to do the artwork. I'll give you all the resources. I'm not going to tell you how often to post this to Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. I'm going to get you on I'm going to get you on Apple, Google, Spotify, etc., and all the podcast apps. And you can promote whichever app you want or the link from Simplecast, whatever you want. I'll give you all the resources, but the marketing is on you because that's not my area of expertise. And I think if you have a marketing person, you're better off to hand it off to them.
Yeah, I think that, so one of the things that I have kind of dabbled in is actually training marketing people to create podcasts.
So you're going the other way.
Yeah. As opposed to do it, teaching them how to do it in-house, because for a lot of businesses, it just makes a lot more sense than, contracting out an editor. Well, and the hopes is always that they contract out an editor, but
right. Yeah, of course.
But all the other stuff, they have the marketing department built in. So it's just a matter of transitioning that knowledge to the marketing department. Have you considered doing anything like that at all?
That's something that I've thought about is, could I do classes? Could I do some sort of tutorial on this is how you set up your podcast? And I have a few tutorials on my website. I've done some webinars. I did some in-person presentations on how to start a podcast, choosing the right mic, getting your host set up, submitting your RSS feed, different software for audio editing, how to do the audio editing. I have all that up on my website as far as presentations and things that I've given. I haven't gotten to a point where I've offered an actual course and marketed it like a Tom Kelly or a Tanner Campbell, both of whom I have a ton of respect for and are great, great guys. I've taken both their courses and gotten a lot out of them. That might be a revenue stream that I look to do maybe later in 2021 to think about offering an online course like that.
Yeah, because it sounds like that would work really well with the business model and the customers that you're already serving. And I'm just, I'm not trying to give you more work.
No, Carrie, you're trying to give me more revenue, and I appreciate that.
Also, I'm always interested in people who do that. So if there's anybody out there who is also doing that, please come on the show so I can pick your brain.
Carrie, do you want to tell them how to get on the show? Oh, go ahead, Daniel.
I'll just go to podcasteditorsmastermind.com/be a guest if you fit that criteria.
Yeah. All right. So I just completely killed that conversation.
So, John, what was your question about video?
Just, what experience the three of you have with video. And, I know we're using StreamYard right now. I've been dabbling in Riverside, and we were talking before we got on the air here about how many things you want to subscribe to at once. And right now, I'm a Squadcast OG. I got grandfathered into the unlimited plan on Squadcast.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of Squadcast. Those guys are great. I'm hoping they do video at some point, but now I'm subscribing every month to Squadcast, to Riverside to dabble into video, to Descript because I'm playing with the editor in there. And gosh, I subscribe to a website called motionarray.com that's $30 a month for unlimited royalty-free music. And then you've got Google and Apple Drive and Dropbox, and you guys know the list goes on and on and on. So yeah, it's starting to add up a little bit, but I definitely am curious if any of you had experience StreamYard you're using now and just in general with video, because that seems to be the next great frontier for me as a piece of my business, but not the main focus of it.
So I do offer video. It's not something I advertise a lot, but I do offer video editing for my clients. And the majority of the time it's going to be a Zoom.
Okay.
Either do just like side by side for the entire video, or like they have it to where like it flips back and forth. So there's not a whole lot of video, like actual editing to do other than just kind of like cutting any big issues. And with video,
right,
because you don't want all those repetitive jump cuts that you were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
I don't take out like the ums and the ahs, like all the minor things, because with video, audio, you're just using your ears, whereas video, you're using your ears and your eyes. So your brain you don't see those like minor mistakes as much. So the editing is actually a lot easier.
That's kind of what I was thinking is it was Mark Yellen who did the course in the Podcast Editors Club about or Podcast Editors Academy about editing video in Adobe Premiere, and that's kind of, if I edited video, Dean, that's what I was thinking is that I would do, just if there were any big flubs, then that's when you go between like the one shot and the two shot. You have all of them lined up, and you just go back and forth when you need to make an edit, but not too many of them.
And a random jump cut really isn't that big of a deal. But I don't do currently. And that's something I want to get into, like with Riverside or whatnot, is having multiple cameras that you can kind of flip back and forth to hide those jump cuts or like the edits.
And I'm conflicted on it, honestly, because video is popular and video is quote unquote sexy, but it's not the crux of what I do. And I would like to offer some services, but I don't want to go too far down that rabbit hole when my unique skill set is in audio. Jack
of all trades is a master of none.
Exactly.
I think that's where maybe hiring out that or outsourcing that is helpful. I know some great video people. I know for my RX course, I hired somebody to do all the videos, and it was just me, right? Because that's not my forte. I have edited some other videos for different purposes, but not for a podcast. And I do, when there's jump cuts, I will disguise it by putting some other image in there. Right. So it's just like a voiceover, right?
And quick side note, Kara, your RX course, anybody who is downloading the Isotope RX program is a must. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a guest on your podcast, but that course that you did was phenomenal. I still refer back to the notes I took on that class.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And you can go to yayapodcasting.com and hit the courses tab and find it there on sale. And if you're a Podcast Editors Academy member, you get a discount on the course. So thank you for that. But yeah, I just find a way to disguise those cuts. However, I am not offering that to clients. And I never considered how the role of, so I think it's interesting that when you offer that producer role sitting on the call with somebody and they're using your account, you can therefore not resell, but you can sell the video portion. Like I never thought of like separating that out like that. I think that's a very interesting thing. And for $150 for like a 30-minute podcast, there's actually enough room, I think, in there to outsource the video editing to somebody who can take care of that and do a decent job.
And that is the one thing that my business has been growing, and I'm very fortunate when a lot of people lost their businesses in 2020, but the podcasting has had such a great year. Getting to the point where I start outsourcing things, and that is going to be my big thing for 2021, and that is the hardest trigger to pull. I think it was Daryl Darnell who said making that first hire is like, giving away the control and the revenue is going to be a real struggle for me. But I'm hoping to get to the point where I run out of hours and I have to do it.
Yeah,
that's kind of where I'm at, because like I want to get more like away from like in the business and working on other things. Mm-hmm. Small plug, I started my podcast channel. So I have talked about like doing a course for Reaper. I've decided to pivot to just doing a YouTube channel. So check that out, Reaper for podcasting. But I want to do more like that content creation. It's like I'm looking more and more into bringing on another editor, and it's really difficult just to get the mindset of it. It's like I've gotten to the point where it's like, okay, I can justify the cost. Like I've worked my mindset around that, like being able to just like gonna be okay paying somebody. Now it's giving up the control and trusting somebody with this.
Yeah,
that is tough. The way I've approached it is I'm currently only giving away part of the editing, right? So I do the initial audio repair. I have somebody that does the detail edit, and then I do the mix and master at the end. So, I mean, this person is still doing the mixing. They're doing the EQ and compression, but I've still got to listen through because I'm going to do the final master. And so that gives me that sense of control to kind of go through. And then also for me, I think I underestimated the amount of time that would need to go into that onboarding process.
Yes.
Training. Yeah.
Yeah. Not because the person I'm working with isn't a good editor, but because the words that we use are ambiguous. And so every time there's a listen through and there's a, hey, we might want to tweak this, or how did you do that? And part of the challenge for me has also been, we're not using the same DAWs. I use Hindenburg. He uses Reaper. I have Reaper, but I don't have all the plugins that he wants to use. And so that's also been a bit of a challenge that I'm going to have to figure out how to work through. Either I have to constrain anybody that I'm going to work with to only use stuff that I've got, or I have to find a different way to do it. I'm not quite sure yet. One thing I did want to just kind of go back to that video portion. One thing that I've done, because people have contacted me, and when they contact me about video, I just go, hey, first off, this isn't really my skill set. Second, if you want somebody that can do color correction and really smooth cuts and B-roll and that kind of stuff, that's not my jam. If you want somebody that can strip your video, make the audio sound good and keep it in sync and trim the top and the tail, I'm your guy. That's how I've approached it.
I like that. Yeah. I think that's probably the way I'm going to look at it. That's good advice.
Yeah. Yeah. Though on to outsourcing, I think that's an interesting topic. I've been working with the 3 different editors for about 3 years now. 2 or 3 years. And there's one now I trust to put together a whole show. Mm-hmm. I will buy the editor's plugins if they don't have it. I wait till they go on sale, and like I've gotten them, RX elements at least, to make sure that we're all using the same plugins. And I do ask they use Audition so we can send session files back and forth.
Right.
And I think that onboarding, missed the step, with a couple of, should have done this step better, the onboarding process. I have now started making in Notion, which is the project management software I use. I started making like, here's the mission of the company. Here is what the expectations are of not just the work you do, but actually like how you present the work that you do to the public. Right. So here, like all these little like nuanced things that I didn't think about when I first started hiring. Mm-hmm. However, they have been the people that have given me my time back. Yeah. Right. They've been worth every penny. If I've gotten sick, if I've had a bad week, if I need to focus on something else, I can, I know I can reach out to Alejandro for Alejandro Ramirez, for example. He is fantastic, and I don't like to share him, but I'm just throwing it out there because I can't always give him all the work that he wants.
Before I know, Sorry to cut you off, Gary. I know we're starting to run short on time, but I have to say, kind of like you guys have here, we have a podcast producers group that there's a group of 5 of us that we've sort of connected to podcast movement and in other ways. We do a Zoom call once a month and kind of compare notes and help each other problem solve different things. And we kind of had this gentleman's agreement that I know it's not the way to do it. We should have had something in writing, but what if one of us gets COVID? Like, what if one of us is on the shelf for 2 weeks or longer? And so the group of 5 of us, it is Catherine O'Brien in Baton Rouge, Johnny Peterson in Fort Worth, Matt Kundle in Winnipeg, David Yaz in Boston, and myself. The 5 of us, we meet every month, and we kind of have this gentleman's agreement between the 5 of us that if, God forbid, one of us goes down, the other 4 can help pitch in and help out in an emergency, or if you had a family emergency, or not just COVID, but anything, or got sick, or broke your right hand and couldn't click, or whatever it was. But we had to have that with each other. So having that backup system, I think, is really important as you sort of network and grow your business in the space, even if you're not to the point where you're going to hire somebody, but having people that you can have their back and vice versa.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But, just having that person you can call, especially when they're in a different time zone. And so you can call them late. That's nice too. But I will shut up now, and because we're running out of time. So,
so one question that I want to ask is, what is one tool in your business that you couldn't live without? Not editing related, something for your business.
Can it be hardware, or am I not allowed to say that? Because I can tell you right now that we'll stay away from software, but my Rodecaster Pro down here is the single best investment I've ever made in my business. I cannot live without it. I think it is the greatest piece of kit or equipment, or whatever phrasing you want to use, to be able to have 4 microphone inputs, to be able to have the USB, to be able to have the audio processing that mimics a little bit of the sound that I had on the radio with all the guts and behind the scenes that I don't quite understand with processing. This is a great box for me to have, that I can actually bring this to a client, again, pre-COVID, and pull this out of the case, plug it in, light up all the pretty colored buttons on it, and have a client go, wow, look at that thing. That's pretty impressive. Yeah, this is what I'm going to record your podcast on. This has helped me make sales with clients, is this box. And then I actually had a client where we were recording an international podcast. Our 2 hosts were in New York and St. Louis. Our 2 guests were in Moscow and Montenegro. And it was a cluster trying to get all the tech and all the equipment, get everybody on the same page. The folks in Moscow and Montenegro, we could not get them to use Squadcast because they didn't have Chrome, or they didn't have a laptop, whatever the situation was. They Skyped me. I took the Skype call on my iPad, sent it by Bluetooth to the Rodecaster, and all 4 people could hear each other. And I had this I recorded a conversation between Moscow, Montenegro, New York, and St. Louis, and somehow by the skin of my teeth pulled it off, thanks to the Rodecaster.
Wow.
Yeah. All I can say is wow. So if you're looking to offer that producer role, you definitely recommend a Rodecaster.
Yeah, the Rodecaster is probably the best $600 I have invested in my business in the 2.5 years I've been doing this. And I know there are other ones that are come as the competition. I haven't used them, so I can't speak to them one or another. But I absolutely love this box, and if you're serious about this, recommend it to anybody.
I never thought about the pretty colors impressing clients.
I pull it out of a bag or a case. I don't have the fancy case for it yet, but I plug it in. I've got the button bar lit up. I've got all the green and red. And what's that thing? Yeah, I mean it's the show. It's the dog and pony show.
Wow.
Yeah, if you're doing an interview, so like not even like the equipment, just like having that producer. So for your client, it's more impressive whenever they're like, hey, you bring them into the thing, they're talking to their guests, like, yeah, my producer's going to be on here helping us out, blah, blah, blah. And now the guest is like, oh, wow, this is a big deal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. So one thing we like to ask all of our guests before we let them go is the tale of your first client. So I'm just going to lay it right there. How did you find your first podcast editing client?
So I mentioned Seth Ressler earlier at Jacobs Media. He not only did he push me to go to my first podcast movement in 2018, he said, hey, you're not working right now. You should do this as a business. You should charge clients X amount of money to do podcasts. And the number he threw out was insane. At the time I thought it was insane. I'm like, there's no way somebody is going to pay me to do a podcast for them. Well, as it would turn out, our other co-host on the Debrief podcast, Becky Scarcello, very awesome lady who's well connected here in Detroit. She's friends with who is now a former news anchor at WWJ, the news talk station. And this woman at the radio station, Laura Bonnell, she has 2 daughters with cystic fibrosis. She unfortunately hit the genetic lottery, both got both genes, and 2 daughters have CF. So she started a local cystic fibrosis foundation. So at a rate that I probably wouldn't even share with you because I'm embarrassed about how low it is in hindsight, I said, tell you what, well, here, what's your budget? Okay, we're going to go to Guitar Center and we're going to get you mics and a Zoom recorder, and I'll take that off the top of what you're going to pay me. You give me whatever's left out of that, and I'll do a 5-6 episode podcast series for you. And Laura, who I love, has asked me for favors here and there, and I've certainly been willing to help her out. And this is the story that I'll share with listeners about relationships. She had a limited budget. She's got a small local charity. And I was doing stuff for her below my normal rate. I felt loyal to her because she was my first client. And then as it would turn out, she was able to get a grant for a podcast series in 2021 and said, you've been really good to me. You've taken care of me when I didn't have a lot to pay you. I want to make sure that with this grant money, I make you whole. So even if, you got to have some business savvy to you, but the relationship piece of it is so, so, so important. And in more cases than not, it will pay off in the end.
Cannot emphasize that enough.
Wow.
Relationships are key.
Totally agree. So that's just perfect. I think that needs to be highlighted and said over and over and over and over again.
I'll leave you with my uncle's 2 rules for life. I always share those, folks. My uncle, who is like a mentor to me, and he worked in the entertainment business doing like murder mystery shows and a whole bunch of other stuff. His 2 rules for life: number 1, know your audience, and number 2, be kind. Everyone you meet is fighting a hard battle. And those are 2 things that I think are universal to everybody. And I thank you for sharing those with me because I try to apply them when I can.
Love it.
So do we have time for the Poddex question of the week?
Let's do it.
It's your guys' show. You tell me.
Yeah. The unofficial Pod Deck segment.
Yeah, not sponsored by them. Don't tell them we're doing it or they might make us stop. So today's question is going to be slightly modified. What is the dumbest way you've ever ruined an episode?
Oh, okay. I don't know if I want to admit to this.
Somebody else go first while I think about that.
I'll go first because I've had time to think about it. So this was probably 3 or 4 years ago, and it was my show. I was hosting the show, did the Skype recording, which was pretty much the standard at the time, got everything done. A couple weeks later, because I record in advance, I was getting ready to edit, and the files were gone. To this day, I have never figured out what happened to those files. The folder was there, no files. And the backup recording that I was supposed to have, because I used Skype call recorder, plus I recorded direct into my DAW, like I did all that stuff, no files. I could find like 1 file for me and no file for the guest, and I should have had like 3 copies of everything. So that's, I don't know how I did it. That was the most embarrassing conversation I've ever had with a guest, to say, thank you so much for coming on the show. I told you I'd make multiple copies, and I did, but I lost them all.
Oh my goodness.
So
that hurts.
Yeah, top that one.
Pretty bad.
I don't know that I can.
I might be able to. So one show, long story short, I posted the wrong episode to the wrong feed. The show that got the episode is a business focused show who talks like about startups. And the episode that got put on his feed is from my client who is a sex coach.
That's straight out of a sitcom right there.
So that was, fortunately, he was very cool about it. And it was a really interesting message I got in Slack that says, you have some much more interesting clients than me.
You wanted to crawl in a hole and die.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I don't have that much, that interesting of a story. I mean, I think you should probably go last. No, mine was I rendered a file, uploaded it, and this was my show. Rendered a file, uploaded it to the host. Didn't think about it until I got an email saying, "Yeah, there's only like half a show here." It like just abruptly stops, and then there's like 20 minutes of silence.
Whoa.
So yeah, that was a fail.
I'll give you a general and a specific. Generally, and this is for any new podcast editors listening. In the beginning, when I first got into this, I was over processing and over editing, and I was doing way too much to the audio. Oh, I have this little toy. I can play with this. Oh, let me do this. Let me do this. Let me do this. And I was just making garbage out of that audio, making hot garbage out of it. So a lighter touch is something I had to learn with whatever the plugins and such that I use specifically. And it actually goes back to the Rodecaster before one of their firmware updates. I host bar trivia on the side again, pre-COVID.
Oh, nice.
And so the bar trivia company, we did a podcast for a while and had fun with it. One of the other hosts and I co-hosted it, and then we brought in other hosts. We had like our summer barbecue at the owner's house, and we were all having beers and having a good time. And we go inside, and we went inside the living room to record the podcast. And it was about 30 minutes into a 35-minute podcast. We were on the Rodecaster. I had 4 mics plugged in. We were rotating in and out, having a great time. But the way the living room was set up was I had the extension, the plug to the Rodecaster going across the room. Right at the end of the podcast, somebody tripped over the cord right out of the wall. And it was gone.
Oh no.
Oh.
So always have a backup and always be mindful of your recording environment.
Yeah.
That's what I learned. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why even though I'm in a controlled environment in my studio, all my clients now, I record them in Squadcast and I record them on my Rodecaster. I always have 2 copies of everything.
Yeah. So Jennifer says this week, I totally forgot to upload the host for one of my clients. I'd set up the show notes, the blog, and all looked good, except for the file was still on my computer. I knew what I'd done as soon as they emailed that it wasn't playing correctly through their website.
Hey, refresh your website. Try it again.
That's so weird. It's working for me.
Yeah.
Easy out, Jennifer.
Yeah. Yeah. Nope. Your website's broken.
Oh, wow. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming on the show. If you want to be a guest, Carrie, do you want to let everybody know how to come on the show?
Yes, you can go to Podcast Editors Mastermind / be a guest. Is that it? Is that okay? Fill out the form and we will get in touch with you. And whether you have a specific thing you want to talk about or you're an expert in something and want to share it with all the other podcast editors who absolutely need to know it, we are happy to have you.
I will say that I have definitely learned something from all of, and I'll include Jennifer in this, all of the 4 of you in this group have taught me something, and I'm just grateful to be on the show and to be networking and colleagues with all of you. So thank you for having me on.
Thank you.
I appreciate that.
Oh, thank you for letting us be nosy.
Yeah.
I feel like this is an unfair advantage, actually. Like we get so much more out of like interviewing everybody else. This is totally selfish. No, I'm kidding. No, it's a lot of fun and it's a lot of learning and it's a lot of getting to know fabulous people like you.
Thank you.
And we also have a challenge coming up soon. Is that correct?
Yes. So by the time this airs, the challenge will have started.
Mm-hmm.
Or will it be over?
Yeah, the challenge starts
the
on
challenge
Monday.
will be over. So let's not put that in the show.
Okay.
But if you're listening in the
cut that out.
Yeah, and if you're listening in the audience right now, just sign up for our newsletter. Podcasteditorsmastermind.com. Scroll down a little bit, plug in your name and your email address, and you will get the challenge straight to your inbox. It is 5 days of activities you can do to actually learn how to market your business. Super simple, super easy, and in a way that works for you and will attract your ideal clients.
Very nice. Excited for this one. And also for the people that are watching the live stream, future recordings or future streams will be earlier in the day, so you don't have to stay up so late. So if you're not already, like the Facebook page, join the Facebook group to stay up to date on the new time whenever we get all that sorted out. But that is it from us. My name is Daniel Abendroth, and you can find me at rothmedia.audio.
I'm Carrie Caulfield Eric. You can find me at yayapodcasting.com.
I'm Brian Ensminger. You can find me at toptieraudio.com. And our guest today was
Jon Gay, JAG in Detroit. Find me at jagindetroit.com, JAG, or on social media, the same, JAG in Detroit.
And our fourth Yeti that couldn't join us tonight is Jennifer Longworth. Unfortunately, she has a real job, and these late nights are getting to her. But you can find her at KY Podcasting or at bourbonbarrelpodcasting.com. Thanks so much for watching.
Thanks, everybody.